In 1952, in heirloom kitchens, grandmothers made 30 appetizers that no one makes anymore. America had never seen anything like it. Deviled eggs arranged on crystal platters, cheese balls rolled in pecans, stuffed celery passed on silver trays. Children waited by the door while mothers prepared bridge club spread. Then the 1980s arrived. The teaching stopped. Store-bought appetizers replaced homemade ones. One by one, the recipe cards were thrown away, and nobody knew where those appetizers went. These are 30 forgotten heirloom appetizers from the 1950s no one makes anymore. Every grandmother had her own deviled egg recipe written on a stained index card tucked inside her recipe box. The dish originated in ancient Rome, but American grandmothers perfected it in the 1950s. Hard-boiled eggs were halved, yolks scooped out and mashed with mayonnaise, yellow mustard, a splash of white vinegar, salt, and black pepper. The creamy mixture was spooned back into the egg whites, then topped with a dusting of paprika. Grandmothers made dozens at a time for bridge club meetings, church socials, and Sunday dinners. The eggs were always served on special glass platters reserved only for this purpose. Each family had their own variation. Some added sweet pickle relish, others used Worcestershire sauce, and a few mixed in finely minced onion. The recipe was never written down completely because measurements were done by sight and taste. Mothers learned by watching their mothers, and daughters learned the same way. By the 1990s, pre-made deviled egg filling appeared in grocery stores, and the homemade tradition faded. Younger generations bought plastic deviled egg carriers, but never learned the family recipe. The heirloom dish that once appeared at every gathering slowly disappeared from tables. Today, most people have never tasted a deviled egg made from their grandmother's actual recipe. 1950s party was complete without a cheese ball sitting in the center of the appetizer table. This dish became the centerpiece of every holiday gathering, cocktail party, and family celebration. Grandmothers combined softened cream cheese with shredded sharp cheddar, a splash of Worcestershire sauce, a pinch of garlic powder, and finely chopped green onions. The mixture was shaped into a perfect ball, then rolled in chopped pecans until completely covered. Some families added pimentos, others mixed in crumbled blue cheese, and a few used walnuts instead of pecans. The cheese ball was placed on a decorative plate surrounded by Ritz crackers, wheat thins, or buttery club crackers. It was always made the night before so the flavors could blend together in the refrigerator. Guests would spread the creamy cheese mixture onto crackers, and the bowl was always scraped clean by the end of the night. The recipe was passed down through generations, with each grandmother teaching her daughter the proper consistency and flavor balance. By the 2000s, grocery stores began selling pre-made cheese balls in plastic containers, and the homemade tradition ended. Daughters never learned how to shape the ball properly or judge the right amount of pecans. The family heirloom that once symbolized hospitality and celebration vanished from modern tables. Many of you have been asking where to find these recipes. We've gathered hundreds of them from the Depression era through the 1970s in our cookbook, Grandma's Kitchen. Complete instructions, pro tips in 10 chapters. Link is in the description below. Now, let's get back to the video. In the South, pimento cheese was more than just an appetizer, it was a family identity. Each grandmother had her own secret ratio of ingredients that made her version the best. The base always included sharp cheddar cheese hand shredded on a box grater, softened cream cheese, Duke's mayonnaise, and diced pimentos from a small glass jar. Some grandmothers added a pinch of cayenne pepper for heat, others mixed in a teaspoon of onion powder, and a few stirred in a splash of pickle juice for tang. The mixture was beaten by hand with a wooden spoon until creamy and spreadable. It was served in a crystal bowl with a mother-of-pearl spreader alongside saltine crackers, celery sticks, or white bread triangles. Grandmothers made fresh batches for bridge club meetings, church luncheons, and afternoon tea parties. The recipe was never measured. Everything was done by feel and taste. Mothers learned by standing beside their mothers in the kitchen, watching the exact motions and adjustments. By the 1990s, grocery stores sold pimento cheese in plastic tubs, and fewer women made it from scratch. Daughters grew up buying it pre-made and never learned the hand-shredding technique or the proper mayonnaise to cheese ratio. The heirloom recipe that defined Southern hospitality disappeared from family kitchens. Before we continue, church cookbooks from the 1950s all contained the same 3-ingredient recipe for sausage balls. Grandmothers mixed 1 pound of ground beef sausage with 2 cups of shredded sharp cheddar cheese and 2 cups of Biscuit baking mix. The ingredients were combined by hand until a sticky dough formed, then rolled into 1-inch balls and placed on ungreased baking sheets. They baked at 350 F for 20 minutes until golden brown and crispy on the outside. The finished sausage balls were piled onto serving platters and served warm or at room temperature. Every grandmother made them for Christmas morning breakfast, church potlucks, and holiday parties. The recipe was so simple that no measurements were needed. Women made them from memory after the first time. Some families added a dash of garlic powder, others mixed in cayenne pepper for spice, and a few used hot sausage for extra flavor. The dish was cheap, filling, and always disappeared quickly. Mothers taught daughters how to roll the balls evenly and judge the perfect baking time. By the 2000s, frozen pre-made sausage balls appeared in grocery stores, and the homemade tradition ended. Younger generations bought them frozen and never learned to make the dough from scratch. The heirloom recipe that once fed entire congregations disappeared from modern kitchens. Cocktail parties in the 1950s always featured a slow cooker filled with tiny meatballs swimming in a sweet and tangy sauce. Grandmothers shaped 1 pound of ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, salt, and pepper into marble-sized meatballs. They were browned in a skillet, then transferred to a pot with a sauce made from 1 jar of grape jelly and 1 bottle of chili sauce. The mixture simmered for 1 hour, creating a glossy, sweet glaze that clung to each meatball. The dish was served in a chafing dish with toothpicks for easy eating. Guests would spear a meatball, pop it into their mouths, and return for more throughout the night. The combination of sweet jelly and tangy chili sauce was unexpectedly delicious and always sparked conversation. Grandmothers made this for cocktail parties, holiday gatherings, and bridge club meetings. The recipe was written on index cards and passed from mother to daughter. By the 1990s, frozen pre-made meatballs and jarred sauces replaced the homemade version. Daughters never learned how to roll the meatballs evenly or balance the jelly to chili ratio. The heirloom appetizer that once defined 1950s entertaining disappeared from family recipe boxes. 5 appetizers disappeared forever. 25 more vanished the same way. Grandmothers stopped teaching. Daughters stopped learning. Recipe cards were thrown away during kitchen renovations. The measurements existed only in memory. Nobody filmed the process. Nobody wrote it down. The appetizers died with the women who made them. Before ranch dressing took over American tables, French onion dip was the king of all party dips. Grandmothers made it by mixing 1 packet of Lipton onion soup mix with 2 cups of sour cream and a squeeze of lemon juice. The mixture was stirred together and refrigerated for at least 2 hours so the dried onions could rehydrate and the flavors could blend. It was served in a crystal bowl surrounded by rippled potato chips, preferably Ruffles brand because their ridges held more dip. The dish appeared at every family gathering, football party, and neighborhood cookout throughout the 1950s and 1960s. Grandmothers always made it the night before, so it would be perfectly chilled and flavorful. Some women added a splash of Worcestershire sauce. Others mixed in finely chopped fresh chives, and a few stirred in crumbled bacon for extra richness. The dip was so popular that the bowl was always scraped clean, and guests would use broken chips to get every last bit. Mothers learned the recipe simply by watching their mothers mix it together, no written instructions needed. By the 2000s, grocery stores sold pre-made French onion dip in plastic containers, and fewer women made it from scratch. Daughters grew up buying it ready-made and never learned the proper sour cream consistency or the importance of refrigeration time. The heirloom dip that once defined casual entertaining disappeared from home kitchens. Serving shrimp cocktail in the 1950s was the ultimate sign of elegance and sophistication at any dinner party. Grandmothers boiled fresh shrimp in salted water with lemon slices and bay leaves for exactly 3 minutes until pink and firm. The shrimp were immediately plunged into ice water to stop the cooking, then peeled and deveined by hand. They were arranged on crystal platters around a small glass bowl filled with homemade cocktail sauce made from ketchup, prepared horseradish, lemon juice, Worcestershire sauce, and a dash of hot sauce. The dish was always served ice cold, often presented on a bed of crushed ice to keep everything fresh throughout the party. Shrimp cocktail appeared at holiday dinners, anniversary celebrations, and special family gatherings when grandmothers wanted to impress their guests. The recipe required careful timing. Overcooked shrimp became rubbery and inedible, while undercooked shrimp were unsafe to eat. Mothers learned by standing beside their mothers, watching the exact moment to remove the shrimp from boiling water. By the 1990s, grocery stores sold pre-cooked frozen shrimp and bottled cocktail sauce, eliminating the need for homemade preparation. Daughters never learned how to judge shrimp doneness or make cocktail sauce from scratch. The heirloom appetizer that once symbolized celebration and luxury disappeared from modern tables. Bridge club ladies in the 1950s always served stuffed celery on their best china platters. Grandmothers washed fresh celery stalks, trimmed them into 3-inch pieces, and filled each one with softened cream cheese mixed with finely chopped green olives with pimentos. Some women added a pinch of garlic powder to the cream cheese, others mixed in Worcestershire sauce for depth, and a few sprinkled paprika on top for color. The stuffed celery was arranged in neat rows on serving trays and kept chilled until guests arrived. The combination of crisp, cold celery with creamy, tangy filling and briny olives created the perfect bite-sized snack. Grandmothers made dozens of pieces for afternoon tea parties, church socials, and holiday gatherings. The recipe was so simple that it never appeared in cookbooks. Women learned it from their mothers through observation. mothers taught daughters how to slice the celery evenly and fill each piece without overfilling. By the 2000s, prepackaged vegetable trays with ranch dip replaced homemade stuffed celery at parties. Younger generations never learned how to prepare fresh celery or make the olive cream cheese filling. The heirloom appetizer that once graced every bridge club table vanished from family traditions. Dinner parties in the 1950s always featured a chafing dish filled with Swedish meatballs and creamy gravy. Grandmothers combined ground beef with breadcrumbs soaked in milk, finely minced onion, egg, salt, pepper, and a pinch of nutmeg. The mixture was shaped into small meatballs and browned in butter until golden on all sides. A rich gravy was made in the same pan using beef broth, heavy cream, and a flour roux, creating a smooth, velvety sauce. The meatballs simmered in the gravy for 20 minutes, absorbing all the flavors. They were served over egg noodles for dinner or kept warm in a chafing dish with toothpicks for appetizer service. The dish appeared at holiday parties, anniversary celebrations, and special family dinners. Grandmothers made the meatballs by hand, ensuring each one was perfectly round and evenly sized. Mothers learned the proper consistency of the meat mixture and the exact moment to stop browning the meatballs. By the 1990s, frozen Swedish meatballs and jarred gravy appeared in grocery stores, and the homemade tradition faded. Daughters never learned how to shape meatballs by hand or make cream gravy from scratch. The heirloom recipe that once impressed dinner guests disappeared from family kitchens. Every grandmother had a huge bowl of homemade party mix sitting out during holiday gatherings. The recipe combined 3 types of Czech cereal rice, wheat, and corn with pretzel sticks, mixed nuts, and bagel chips. Everything was tossed together on large baking sheets, then drizzled with melted butter mixed with Worcestershire sauce, garlic powder, onion powder, and seasoned salt. The mixture was baked at 250 F for 1 hour, stirred every 15 minutes to ensure even toasting. The finished party mix was crispy, savory, and addictively crunchy. Grandmothers made enormous batches and stored them in large tins, metal canisters, or glass jars for weeks of snacking. The recipe appeared in church cookbooks, junior league publications, and handwritten recipe cards across America. Mothers learned by helping their mothers stir the mixture during baking and judge the perfect golden brown color. By the 2000s, pre-made Chex Mix appeared in bags at grocery stores, and fewer women made it from scratch. Daughters grew up buying it ready-made and never learned the proper butter to Worcestershire ratio or the slow baking technique. The heirloom snack that once filled holiday homes with savory aromas disappeared from family traditions. 10 appetizers gone forever. 20 more vanished just as quickly. Every single one was made by grandmothers in the 1950s. Every single one disappeared by the year 2000. Recipe cards were tossed. Teaching stopped. Daughters never learned. The appetizers died with the generation that created them. The mixture was pressed through a cookie press fitted with a star-shaped disc, creating long, ridged strips that were cut into 3-inch pieces. The cheese straws were baked at 350 F for 12 minutes until golden and crisp. They were stored in airtight tins and could last for weeks, making them perfect for impromptu guests. Grandmothers made them for bridge club meetings, afternoon tea party socials, and holiday gatherings. The recipe required precise measurements and a delicate hand too much cayenne made them too spicy, too little butter made them crumbly, and overbaking made them bitter. Mothers learned by standing beside their mothers, watching the exact moment to pull them from the oven and the proper way to press the dough through the cookie press. Some families added a teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce for depth. Others mixed in a pinch of garlic powder, and a few used extra sharp aged cheddar for a stronger flavor. Afternoon tea parties and ladies' luncheons in the 1950s always featured delicate egg salad finger sandwiches arranged on tiered serving trays. Grandmothers boiled 1 dozen eggs until hard-cooked, peeled them while still warm, and chopped them finely by hand using a pastry cutter or fork. The chopped eggs were mixed with mayonnaise, yellow mustard, a splash of white vinegar, salt, white pepper, and sometimes a pinch of paprika. The mixture was spread evenly onto thin slices of white sandwich bread with the crusts carefully trimmed off. By the 1990s, pre-made egg salad appeared in grocery store delis, and the homemade tradition faded. Daughters never learned how to boil eggs properly or trim bread crusts neatly. The heirloom tea sandwich that once symbolized elegance and refinement disappeared from modern gatherings. Ladies' luncheons in the 1950s were incomplete without platters of chicken salad finger sandwiches arranged like works of art. Grandmothers poached a whole chicken in seasoned water with celery, onion, and bay leaves until the meat was tender and falling off the bone. The chicken was cooled, shredded by hand into small pieces, and mixed with mayonnaise, finely diced celery, salt, white pepper, and a squeeze of lemon juice. Some grandmothers added chopped pecans for crunch, others mixed in halved seedless grapes for sweetness, and a few stirred in a teaspoon of curry powder for exotic flavor. The chicken salad was spread onto thin white bread with crusts removed, then cut into triangles, rectangles, or small circles using biscuit cutters. The sandwiches were arranged on crystal or silver platters, covered with damp linen napkins, and refrigerated until serving time. Grandmothers made them for bridge club meetings, afternoon teas, bridal showers, and church luncheons. By the 1990s, grocery store delis sold pre-made chicken salad, and rotisserie chickens replaced home poached birds. Dinner parties in the 1950s always featured a platter of hot, bubbling stuffed mushrooms as the opening act. Grandmothers selected large white button mushrooms, removed the stems, and scraped out the gills to create a hollow cap. The stems were finely minced and sautéed with butter, minced garlic, and finely chopped onion until softened and fragrant. This mixture was combined with cream cheese, shredded Parmesan cheese, breadcrumbs, salt, pepper, and a splash of Worcestershire sauce. The stuffed mushrooms were baked at 375 F for 20 minutes until the tops were golden brown and the mushrooms were tender. They were served hot on decorative platters, sometimes garnished with fresh parsley. By the 1990s, frozen pre-stuffed mushrooms appeared in grocery stores, and the homemade tradition ended. Daughters never learned how to prepare fresh mushrooms or make the cream cheese filling from scratch. Coastal grandmothers brought their families' crab dip recipes to every celebration, each one slightly different but equally delicious. The base always started with lump crab meat never imitation picked clean of any shell fragments by hand. This was folded gently into softened cream cheese, mayonnaise, sour cream, lemon juice, Worcestershire sauce, Old Bay seasoning, and a pinch of cayenne pepper. Some grandmothers added grated sharp cheddar cheese, others mixed in finely minced green onions, and a few stirred in a tablespoon of prepared horseradish for heat. The mixture was spread into a shallow baking dish, topped with breadcrumbs or crushed Ritz crackers, and dotted with butter. It baked at 350 F for 25 minutes until hot, bubbly, and golden on top. The dip was served in the same dish, kept warm on a trivet, and surrounded by crackers, toasted baguette slices, or celery sticks. Grandmothers made this for holiday parties, New Year's Eve celebrations, and special family gatherings. Cocktail parties throughout the 1950s and 1960s featured slow cookers filled with tiny hot dogs swimming in a glossy, sweet sauce. Grandmothers combined 1 jar of grape jelly with 1 bottle of chili sauce in a large pot, whisking them together until smooth and heated through. 2 packages of beef cocktail franks were added to the bubbling sauce and simmered for 30 minutes until plump and glazed. The mixture was transferred to a chafing dish or slow cooker set on low heat, and a container of toothpicks was placed nearby for guests to spear the franks. The combination of sweet grape jelly and tangy chili sauce created an addictive flavor that kept guests returning to the table all night. Grandmothers made this for holiday parties, Super Bowl gatherings, and neighborhood potlucks. The recipe was incredibly simple. Neighborhood gatherings and backyard barbecues in the 1950s always featured a bowl of sour cream and onion dip surrounded by ridged potato chips. Grandmothers made it by mixing 2 cups of full-fat sour cream with 1 envelope of Lipton onion soup mix, a squeeze of fresh lemon juice, and sometimes a dash of Worcestershire sauce. The mixture was stirred together and refrigerated for at least 2 hours, allowing the dried onions to rehydrate and the flavors to meld into a thick, creamy dip. It was served in crystal or ceramic bowls and replenished throughout the party as guests devoured it. Grandmothers made this for casual get-togethers, football parties, and summer cookouts. The recipe was so simple that most women never wrote it down, they just knew the proportions by heart after making it a few times. Ladies' luncheons and afternoon bridge clubs in the 1950s always featured bowls of creamy ham salad served with crackers or bread. Grandmothers used leftover baked ham, grinding it through a hand-crank meat grinder or chopping it finely by hand with a sharp knife. The ground ham was mixed with mayonnaise, yellow mustard, sweet pickle relish, a splash of pickle juice, and sometimes finely minced celery or onion. The mixture was beaten together until creamy and spreadable, then chilled in the refrigerator for at least 1 hour before serving. Grandmothers served it in crystal bowls with small spreaders, surrounded by saltine crackers, Ritz crackers, or sliced white bread. Some families added a pinch of paprika for color. Others mixed in a teaspoon of prepared horseradish for heat, and a few stirred in hard-boiled egg for extra protein. Afternoon tea parties in the 1950s were defined by delicate cucumber sandwiches arranged on tiered serving trays. Grandmothers peeled fresh cucumbers, sliced them paper thin using a sharp knife or mandolin, and laid them on paper towels sprinkled with salt to draw out excess moisture for 15 minutes. Meanwhile, softened butter was whipped with fresh dill, lemon juice, and white pepper until light and fluffy. Thin slices of white bread had their crusts carefully trimmed off, then were spread with the herbed butter and layered with the drained cucumber slices. Each sandwich was cut into triangles, rectangles, or small circles and arranged on silver platters lined with lace doilies. The sandwiches were covered with damp tea towels and refrigerated until serving time to keep them fresh and prevent the bread from drying out. Grandmothers made them for bridge club meetings, baby showers, bridal luncheons, and garden parties. Mothers learned by watching their mothers slice cucumbers to translucent thinness and spread butter to the very edges of the bread. Some families added cream cheese to the butter mixture. Others used watercress instead of dill, and a few added a thin layer of mayonnaise. By the 1990s, pre-made tea sandwiches appeared at catering shops, and the homemade tradition faded. Daughters never learned the proper cucumber slicing technique or the importance of salting to remove moisture. Late-night bridge club snacks in the 1950s always included a platter of hot cheese dreams fresh from the oven. Grandmothers made these by mixing shredded sharp cheddar cheese with softened butter, mayonnaise, a pinch of cayenne pepper, and sometimes a dash of Worcestershire sauce until creamy and spreadable. This mixture was spread thickly onto slices of white bread with crusts removed, then cut into triangles or squares. The cheese-topped bread was placed on baking sheets and broiled for 3-4 minutes until the cheese was melted, bubbly, and lightly browned on top. They were served immediately while still hot and crispy. Some families added crumbled bacon to the cheese mixture. Others mixed in minced onion, and a few topped them with sliced tomatoes before broiling. The sandwiches could be prepared hours in advance and kept covered in the refrigerator, then broiled just before serving. By the 1990s, frozen cheese appetizers replaced homemade cheese dreams, and fewer women made them from scratch. 20 appetizers vanished completely. 10 more followed without a trace. Every recipe was homemade in the 1950s. Every recipe disappeared by 2000. Grandmothers died taking the knowledge with them. Daughters never asked for the recipes. The teaching ended. The appetizers were lost forever. Walking into a grandmother's house in the 1950s, you'd always find a crystal bowl filled with warm, buttery toasted pecans sitting on the coffee table. These simple nuts were a staple appetizer that appeared at every gathering, from casual afternoon visits to formal dinner parties. Grandmothers made them by melting butter in a large skillet, adding raw pecan halves, and stirring constantly over medium heat until the nuts turned golden brown and fragrant. Salt was sprinkled over the hot pecans while they were still in the pan, ensuring even coating. Some grandmothers added a pinch of cayenne pepper for heat, others used a tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce for depth, and a few tossed them with brown sugar for a sweet and salty version. The toasted pecans were spread on paper towels to drain excess butter, then transferred to decorative bowls placed strategically around the house. They cost very little to make a pound of raw pecans, a stick of butter, and salt, yet they made guests feel immediately welcome and cared for. Grandmothers kept them in airtight tins and could pull them out at a moment's notice when unexpected company arrived. Grandmothers knew that pecans continued cooking for a few seconds after being removed from heat, so they pulled them early to prevent over-toasting. The special crystal bowls that once held warm, freshly toasted pecans were put away in cabinets or sold at estate sales. Dinner parties in the 1950s reached peak sophistication when the hostess brought out her special fondue pot and tiny forks. Cheese fondue became the ultimate symbol of elegant entertaining, transforming a simple meal into an interactive experience that kept guests engaged for hours. Grandmothers made authentic Swiss fondue by rubbing the inside of a ceramic fondue pot with a cut garlic clove, then heating dry white wine until it barely simmered. Shredded Gruyere and Emmental cheeses were tossed with cornstarch, then gradually added to the wine while stirring in a figure-8 pattern to prevent separation. A splash of kirsch was stirred in at the end, along with a pinch of nutmeg and white pepper. The fondue pot was placed over a small flame at the center of the table, surrounded by cubed French bread, blanched vegetables, and apple slices for dipping. Guests would spear bread or vegetables onto long fondue forks, dip them into the bubbling cheese, and twist to coat them completely. The ritual of eating fondue was just as important as the food itself. If someone dropped their bread into the pot, they had to kiss the person to their left, creating laughter and conversation throughout the meal. Some families made chocolate fondue for dessert, dipping strawberries, pound cake, and marshmallows into melted chocolate. By the 1980s, fondue fell out of fashion, considered too retro and time-consuming for modern entertaining. The special fondue pots were packed away in attic boxes or donated to thrift stores. Casual afternoon gatherings in the 1950s always featured a bowl of creamy tuna salad served with an assortment of crackers. Grandmothers opened cans of solid white albacore tuna packed in water, drained it thoroughly, and flaked it into a mixing bowl with a fork. Mayonnaise, finely diced celery, minced onion, a squeeze of lemon juice, salt, and black pepper were mixed in until everything was well combined and creamy. Some grandmothers added sweet pickle relish for sweetness, others mixed in hard-boiled egg for extra protein, and a few stirred in a teaspoon of Dijon mustard for tang. The tuna salad was spooned into a crystal or ceramic serving bowl, placed in the center of a platter, and surrounded by saltine crackers, Ritz crackers, wheat thins, and Triscuits. Guests would spread the tuna salad onto crackers using small butter knives or spreaders. The dish was affordable, quick to prepare, and could be made hours in advance and kept refrigerated until guests arrived. Grandmothers served it at bridge club meetings, afternoon teas, and casual luncheons. Daughters grew up buying it ready-made and never learned how to flake tuna properly, dice celery finely, or balance the flavors. The heirloom tuna salad that once appeared at countless afternoon gatherings disappeared from family entertaining. Bridge club ladies in the 1950s arrived with platters of elegant cream cheese and olive roll-ups that disappeared within minutes. These simple but sophisticated appetizers required patience and a delicate hand to prepare correctly. Grandmothers started by softening blocks of cream cheese to room temperature, then beating them with a wooden spoon until smooth and spreadable. Thin slices of deli ham or roast beef were laid flat on a clean work surface, and the cream cheese mixture was spread evenly over each slice from edge to edge. The meat was rolled up tightly like a jelly roll, then wrapped in plastic wrap and refrigerated for at least 2 hours to firm up. Just before serving, the rolls were sliced into half-inch rounds, revealing beautiful pinwheel patterns of pink meat, white cream cheese, and green olive flecks. The roll-ups were arranged on serving platters and speared with decorative toothpicks. The recipe required precision and planning. If the cream cheese wasn't soft enough, it tore the deli meat when spreading. If it was too soft, it oozed out the sides when rolling. It tore the deli meat when spreading. If it was too soft, it oozed out the sides when rolling. The rolls had to be chilled long enough to firm up completely, or they fell apart when sliced. Grandmothers knew to use very sharp knives and wipe them clean between cuts to maintain neat, clean pinwheel shapes. Mothers learned by helping their mothers spread the cream cheese to exactly the right thickness, roll the meat tightly without squeezing out the filling, and slice the chilled rolls without crushing them. The finished roll-up looked impressive and fancy, making them perfect for special occasions when grandmothers wanted to show their culinary skills. By the 1990s, pre-made pinwheel appetizers appeared in grocery store delis, and the homemade tradition faded. Daughters never learned the proper spreading technique, careful rolling method, or the importance of refrigeration time. The simplest appetizers in grandmother's arsenal were often the most beloved, and buttered saltines proved that sophistication didn't require complexity. These two-ingredient wonders appeared at every casual gathering, from afternoon coffee visits to late-night card games. Grandmothers would arrange saltine crackers in a single layer on baking sheets, then brush each cracker generously with melted butter using a pastry brush. The crackers were baked at 350 F for 10-12 minutes until golden brown and crispy. Some grandmothers sprinkled them with garlic powder before baking, others added dried herbs like rosemary or thyme, and a few dusted them with grated Parmesan cheese for extra flavor. The buttered saltines were served warm in baskets lined with cloth napkins, and guests would eat them by the handful. The recipe cost almost nothing: a sleeve of saltines and a stick of butter, yet they tasted rich, indulgent, and addictive. Grandmothers made them because they could be prepared in minutes with ingredients that were always in the pantry, making them perfect for unexpected company. The crackers stayed crispy for several hours after baking, so they could be made ahead of time and set out when guests arrived. 25 appetizers disappeared forever. 5 more followed into extinction. Grandmothers died without teaching anyone. Recipe boxes were thrown in dumpsters during estate cleanouts. Nobody saved the cards. Nobody asked for the recipes. The final 5 appetizers vanished just as completely as the first 25. Sandwiches cocktail parties throughout the 1950s featured silver trays piled high with tiny Ritz cracker sandwiches that looked elegant but required minimal effort to prepare. Grandmothers bought boxes of Ritz crackers, the buttery, flaky kind that melted on your tongue, and paired them into matching sizes. Between each pair of crackers, they spread fillings that ranged from simple to sophisticated depending on the occasion. The most common filling was pimento cheese mixed with a little extra mayonnaise to make it softer and easier to spread. Other popular fillings included cream cheese mixed with chopped olives, deviled ham spread, egg salad, chicken salad, or even peanut butter for afternoon gatherings with children present. Some grandmothers made multiple varieties and arranged them in sections on large platters, sometimes adding small labels so guests knew which filling was which. The cracker sandwiches were made several hours ahead and stored in the refrigerator covered with damp paper towels to keep them from drying out. Just before guests arrived, the sandwiches were arranged on serving platters and brought to room temperature. The combination of buttery, crispy crackers with creamy, flavorful fillings created the perfect bite-sized snack that required no utensils and left no mess. The technique for making perfect Ritz cracker sandwiches was more involved than it seemed at first glance. The crackers had to be paired carefully by size so the sandwiches looked uniform and professional. Holiday gatherings in the 1950s always featured enormous bowls of homemade snack mix that grandmothers called nuts and bolts because of its appearance. This savory mixture combined multiple types of cereal rice Chex, wheat Chex, corn Chex, and Cheerios with pretzel sticks, mixed nuts, bagel chips, and sometimes oyster crackers or goldfish crackers. Everything was spread across multiple large baking sheets and drizzled with melted butter mixed with Worcestershire sauce, garlic powder, onion powder, seasoned salt, and celery salt. Grandmothers used wooden spoons to toss everything together, ensuring every piece was coated with the savory butter mixture. The pans went into a 250F oven for 1 hour, and grandmothers set timers to stir the mixture every 15 minutes to ensure even toasting and prevent burning. The slow, low-temperature baking dried out the cereal and nuts, making them incredibly crispy and crunchy. After baking, the mixture was spread on paper towels to cool completely, then stored in large tins, glass jars, or metal canisters. Grandmothers made enormous batches during the holidays, often tripling or quadrupling the recipe to fill multiple containers for gifts and home snacking. The recipe appeared in church cookbooks, junior league publications, and handwritten recipe cards across America. The technique for making perfect nuts and bolts required patience and attention that modern cooks often lack. The butter Worcestershire mixture had to be drizzled evenly over all the dry ingredients, then tossed thoroughly so every piece was coated. Any dry spots would be bland and disappointing. The mixture had to be stirred every 15 minutes during the hour-long baking time. Skipping even one stirring session resulted in burnt pieces on the bottom and pale pieces on top. Summer gatherings in the 1950s featured platters of fresh tomato canapes that showcased seasonal produce at its peak. Grandmothers made these elegant appetizers by toasting thin slices of French bread or baguette until golden and crispy. Meanwhile, they combined softened cream cheese with mayonnaise, finely minced fresh basil or dill, a squeeze of lemon juice, salt, and white pepper. This herbed cream cheese mixture was spread onto each toasted bread slice from edge to edge. Fresh tomatoes, usually beefsteak or early girl varieties from backyard gardens, were sliced into thin rounds and patted dry with paper towels to remove excess moisture. One tomato slice was placed on top of each cream cheese-covered toast. Then the canapes were garnished with a tiny sprig of fresh herb, a sprinkle of paprika, or a small dollop of mayonnaise piped from a pastry bag. The finished canapes were arranged on silver or crystal platters and served immediately while the toast was still crispy and the tomatoes were cold and fresh. Grandmothers made these for summer luncheons, afternoon tea parties, and garden parties when tomatoes were at their peak ripeness and flavor. The recipe required perfect timing and couldn't be made too far in advance if assembled more than 30 minutes before serving. The tomato juice soaked into the toast and made it soggy and unpleasant. The skill of making perfect tomato canapes lay in the details that only experienced cooks understood. The bread had to be sliced. Very thin, thick slices made the canapes too heavy and bready. The toast had to be completely cooled before spreading the cream cheese, or the heat melted the cheese and made it runny. The tomatoes had to be sliced uniformly and patted completely dry. Any excess moisture meant instant sogginess. The cream cheese layer had to be thick enough to provide a barrier between the moist tomato and the crispy toast, but not so thick that it overwhelmed the fresh tomato flavor. Grandmothers knew to assemble these at the last possible moment, often setting up an assembly line in the kitchen and bringing out fresh platters throughout the party. Mothers learned by helping their mothers toast bread to the perfect golden color, spread cream cheese to exactly the right thickness, slice tomatoes uniformly, and judge the moment when assembled canapes were too old to serve. By the 1990s, catering companies made fancy canapes, and fewer women prepared fresh appetizers from scratch. Daughters never learned the careful assembly technique or the importance of timing. Slice tomatoes uniformly and judge the moment when assembled canapes were too old to serve. By the 1990s, catering companies made fancy canapes, and fewer women prepared fresh appetizers from scratch. Daughters never learned the careful assembly technique or the importance of timing. The Heirloom summer appetizer that once celebrated fresh garden tomatoes disappeared from family entertaining. Spread elegant luncheons and special gatherings in the 1950s featured crystal bowls filled with pale pink salmon cream cheese spread. Grandmothers made this luxurious appetizer by draining canned pink salmon, removing any bones and skin, then flaking it finely with a fork. The salmon was mixed with softened cream cheese, mayonnaise, lemon juice, finely minced onion, a dash of Worcestershire sauce, and a pinch of cayenne pepper. Some grandmothers added prepared horseradish for heat, others mixed in chopped fresh dill for brightness, and a few stirred-in capers for briny flavor. The mixture was beaten together until smooth and creamy, then spooned into serving bowls and garnished with a sprinkle of paprika, fresh dill sprigs, or thin lemon slices. The spread was served with water crackers, Melba toast, cucumber rounds, or toasted baguette slices. Grandmothers made this for bridal showers, anniversary parties, and special afternoon teas when they wanted to serve something more elevated than everyday appetizers. The recipe was more expensive than most other spreads because of the salmon, so it appeared only on important occasions. The pale pink color looked beautiful on serving tables, and the rich, savory flavor impressed guests who expected ordinary cream cheese spreads. The technique for making perfect salmon cream cheese spread required attention to detail and proper ingredient handling. The salmon had to be drained extremely well. Any excess liquid made the spread watery and thin. All bones and dark skin had to be removed carefully because even small pieces created an unpleasant texture and appearance. The salmon had to be flaked very finely so it distributed evenly throughout the cream cheese without leaving large chunks. The cream cheese had to be softened to room temperature before mixing, or lumps would remain no matter how vigorously it was beaten. The spread needed to chill for at least 1 hour before serving so the flavors could meld and the texture could firm up. Grandmothers knew that using pink salmon instead of red sockeye made the spread more delicate in both color and flavor. They also knew to taste and adjust the seasoning after chilling because cold foods needed more salt and acid than warm foods. Mothers learned by helping their mothers drain salmon, pick out bones, flake it finely, and judge the proper consistency thick enough to hold its shape on a cracker, but soft enough to spread easily. By the 1990s, grocery stores sold pre-made salmon spreads and smoked salmon dips, and fewer women made it from scratch. Daughters never learned how to handle canned salmon properly or balance the delicate flavors. The heirloom spread that once impressed luncheon guests disappeared from family entertaining. Every grandmother's party table in the 1950s featured an elaborate vegetable relish tray arranged like a work of art. These weren't simple veggie platters, they were carefully composed presentations that demonstrated the hostess's attention to detail and commitment to hospitality. Grandmothers spent hours preparing fresh vegetables into decorative shapes and arrangements. Carrots were peeled and cut into sticks, then placed in ice water with a splash of lemon juice to keep them crisp and bright orange. Celery stalks were trimmed, cut into uniform sticks, and sometimes stuffed with cream cheese or pimento cheese. Radishes were carved into roses by making small cuts around the outside and soaking them in ice water until the petals opened. Cherry tomatoes were left whole and arranged in colorful clusters. Cucumber was sliced into thick rounds or cut into sticks. Green onions were trimmed to leave some green tops. Bell peppers, red, green, and yellow, were cut into strips. Cauliflower and broccoli florets were blanched briefly to brighten their color and soften them slightly. Black and green olives filled small dishes placed around the tray. The vegetables were arranged on large crystal or silver platters in beautiful patterns, often radiating from a center bowl of dip. Common dips included French onion dip, ranch dressing, blue cheese dressing, or a simple mixture of mayonnaise and lemon juice. The art of creating a perfect vegetable relish tray was passed down through generations of women who understood that presentation was as important as flavor. Vegetables had to be cut uniformly so the tray looked professional and intentional. Everything had to be ice cold and crispy, which meant soaking most vegetables in ice water for at least 30 minutes before arranging. The tray had to be balanced in color, texture, and height, with careful attention to creating visual interest. Grandmothers knew that radish roses required very sharp knives and a steady hand. They knew that blanching broccoli and cauliflower for exactly 30 seconds in boiling water, then plunging them into ice water, made them vibrant and easier to digest. They knew to dry every vegetable thoroughly before arranging so water didn't pool on the serving tray. Mothers learned by standing beside their mothers, watching them carve radish roses, judge the proper ice water soaking time, and arrange vegetables into beautiful patterns. By the 1990s, grocery stores sold pre-cut vegetable trays with ranch dip in plastic containers, and the art of creating relish trays disappeared. Daughters never learned how to carve radish roses, blanch vegetables properly, or arrange a tray with artistic composition. The special crystal and silver trays used for relish displays were packed away or sold. The heirloom tradition that once demonstrated a hostess's skill and care vanished from modern entertaining. 30 heirloom appetizers disappeared in one generation. Every single one was made by grandmothers who learned from their mothers, who learned from their mothers before them. The recipes lived on stained index cards, handwritten in fading ink, tucked inside wooden recipe boxes that sat on kitchen counters. These weren't just appetizers, they were family identity, passed down through 3 generations of women who stood side by side in kitchens, teaching without words, learning through observation. Then the chain broke. Daughters stopped watching. Mothers stopped teaching. Grandmothers passed away, taking the measurements that existed only in their hands and the techniques that lived only in their memory. The recipe cards were thrown in trash bags during estate sales. The crystal serving platters were donated to thrift stores. The special tools fondue pots, cookie presses, meat grinders were sold for pennies at yard sales. If your grandmother made deviled eggs from scratch, you tasted something that will never exist again. If you remembered cheese balls at holiday parties, you witnessed a tradition that died in silence. Comment below which appetizer your grandmother made best. Share this with anyone who grew up in the 1950s before these recipes disappear completely from memory and nobody remembers that grandmothers once spent hours making appetizers by hand.